If you had to choose between Kentucky basketball landing Chaz Lanier, Jaxson Robinson, or Ansley Almonor, which one would you pick? I have a pretty clear answer on today's episode of Locked On Kentucky.
You are Locked On Kentucky, your daily podcast on the Kentucky Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what's going on, Big Blue Nation? Welcome on in to Locked On Kentucky, your daily Kentucky Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Lance Dawe. On today's episode of Locked On Kentucky, we are going to be having a conversation about three prospects Mark Pope and company are currently looking at in the transfer portal: Chaz Lanier, Jaxson Robinson, and Ansley Almonor. Which one could the Wildcats pick up? Could they get two of them, or could they possibly even get all three? Going to discuss that on today's episode, as well as a BYU forward that has entered the transfer portal that I think would be a very, very interesting fit with Kentucky basketball's roster this upcoming season. Thank you so much for making Locked On Kentucky your first listen every single day. Want to remind everyone out there that we are free and available on all platforms. And if you are watching on YouTube, I would greatly appreciate it if you subscribed to the show. And if you are listening on podcast, I would appreciate it if you subscribed there as well. All right, so let's go ahead and get into it. Kentucky basketball looking at three prospects in the transfer portal that they really want to bring in onto the team. Now, as we stated on yesterday's episode, the Kentucky Wildcats have three scholarships left to give to kind of round out their roster. And if I'm not mistaken, the third player that they are going to bring in will probably happen later on this offseason, and it potentially may be a kid that reclassifies as a high school player to this year's class. We don't have any names. That's just kind of what Mark Pope has said about how he's got two different guys that he's going to get through the portal that are serious commitments, and then the third player that could be a reclassification, could be an extra transfer portal piece that's a depth piece. He's not sure. But really, we need to focus on two spots here today. Unfortunately, like I just mentioned, there are three players that I think Kentucky would really love to have. Chaz Lanier of North Florida, Jaxson Robinson, transfer from BYU, where Mark Pope is previously from, and Ansley Almonor out of Fairleigh Dickinson University, FDU, the team that beat Purdue here just a couple of tournaments ago. Which one would you have? I asked it at the beginning of the show. I want to ask you again in the comments below. Let me know who you would like to have out of these three. If you could only pick one, who would you have? I think the answer is pretty clear for me. Now, it may ruffle some feathers, but I think the player that I would go with first is Chaz Lanier out of North Florida. Now, I know a lot of you in the comments are going to be saying that you would rather have a Jaxson Robinson, you'd rather have Almanor out of FDU, you'd rather have somebody at that power forward spot that can knock down those types of shots as a stretch four. But I really do think Chaz Lanier, statistically, and watching him on tape, and the need that Kentucky has for a pure score, it is just simply too good to pass up with the combination of some pieces that are already on roster. I think some issues that previous Kentucky teams underneath Coach Cal had is that they only had one true shooter. They only had one player that could really knock down outside shots consistently, and sometimes maybe they had two, but they didn't feed the second option nearly as much as the first. This past year, Kentucky had a plethora of shooters and still managed to mismanage the rotation. I think if you can get somebody like Chaz Lanier in alongside Kobe Brea, who was the best shooter in the country statistically, not the most efficient, which we'll get to here with Chaz Lanier in just a second, but if you can pair those two guys up at shooting guard and small forward, two guys that can absolutely knock the lights out when it comes to shooting the basketball, I think Kentucky would be in a very good spot, especially considering the addition of Kirk Risa and then Lamont Butler at point guard, two players that I think could get those guys the ball consistently. Take a look at the numbers here. Chaz Lanier, last season at North Florida, 19.7 points per game, while shooting 51% from the floor and 44% from three. Insane splits for the 6'4 shooting guard. Also shot 88% from the charity stripe, averaging 3.4 free throw attempts per game. At a points per possession rate, Kobe Brea had the best season in the last decade of college basketball shooters. He was the most effective player, points per possession-wise, I believe it was 1.33. And the next closest player in the last decade was 1.31 PPP, points per possession. But from an effective field goal percentage standpoint, Chaz Lanier was the best player in college basketball a season ago. The fact that 6'4", he was able to shoot over 50% from the floor and then 44% from beyond the arc, and he was taking 7.5 three-pointers per game, is stellar. That is very, very good. That is comparable, if not better, than Antonio Reeves when he was coming out of Illinois State. So I'd ask you guys, similar frame, similar scoring, similar efficiency, actually better efficiency than Antonio Reeves. Wouldn't you want to have another Antonio Reeves on your team, somebody that can go out there and be a pure scorer for you, not to mention the nearly 5 rebounds, 2 assists, and steal per game that Lanier brought to the Ospreys of North Florida a season ago? I think that this pickup would be perfect for Kentucky's backcourt, again, for the reasons that I mentioned previously, and then just individually. Kentucky needs a scorer. They need somebody that can go out there and be the leader in terms of points for this team. And I think that he would be a clear-cut choice to end up being that guy. Chaz Lanier would be my first pick. I would want Chaz Lanier, and then it would go Jaxson Robinson and Ansley Almonor as a second and third option, maybe as a 2A, 2B type of situation here, because I don't necessarily prefer Robinson strongly over Almanor. And it's not necessarily because of the three-point shooting that Almanor brings, shooting 38.5% as opposed to Jaxson Robinson's 35.4. It's just because I think if you get somebody at that stretch 4 position and you ask them to kind of, whether it be Almanor or Robinson, you ask them to kind of statistically do the same things in terms of volume, I think they're going to have similar efficiency. Now, Robinson, I would put ahead of Almanor because of that upside. Just as an athlete, I think that he's more bouncy. I think that he could probably do a little bit more for this Kentucky team. I think he fits better in the system because of the fact that he's been in it for longer than Almanor has. But neither of those two kids, Robinson or Almanor, would be terrible options. But Chaz Lanier would be my first option. Let's talk about the situation here with Robinson, Almanor, Lanier. Let's talk about where Kentucky stands with all 3 of those guys. We'll do that in just a second. Before I do that, though, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at LinkedIn Jobs. When you are hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role, and that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs, because LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn is not just another job board. They help you hire professionals you cannot find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites, so if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you are looking in the wrong place. You can post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That is linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, continuing along here on the Tuesday edition of Locked On Kentucky. Lance Dawe hanging out here with you. Again, I appreciate you checking out the show today. If you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel already or the podcast feed wherever you are tuned in, I would greatly appreciate it if you went ahead and did so. Also, if you want to leave any questions for the show in the comments below, you can do that at Locked On UK on Twitter is where you can find me if you want to leave questions there. Okay, so we talked about Chaz Lanier, how I think he would be the best option for Kentucky basketball right now. I confidently believe that he would be my first pick. Let's talk about where all 3 of these guys stand. So as we mentioned on yesterday's episode, Chaz Lanier at the G League Combine alongside Wooga Poplar. Poplar in the game that Lanier played in, Poplar scored 18 points. Lanier only 1 of 3 from the field, 3 points in his G League Combine game. I said on yesterday's episode, I don't put too much stock into either of their performances. Wooga, I think, is an example of what he can be, especially if Mark Pope is able to unlock some more consistency from him. And then Lanier, I didn't think that was reflective of what his game could be for the Wildcats at all. Lanier right now, I think, is in good standing with Kentucky, just as far as Kentucky's chance to actually land him. Kentucky's been in contact. Mark Pope actually went to go see Poplar and Lanier in person during the combine. If I had to guess, I'd say Kentucky's the favorite to get him right now. I'm not quite sure what's happening behind the scenes as far as offers go with Tennessee and BYU and the Wildcats themselves. Don't have any information on that. Probably not going to find a ton of information about that out there right now. But my guess is that Kentucky is the favorite to land them. And I really, really do hope that they do, because he, again, is my top guy right now. Jaxson Robinson. We've not heard really a ton out of Robinson's camp, but we did get some news today about Kentucky and just their pursuit of Robinson. Apparently, he is currently at the NBA draft combine, and Kentucky is gone out to visit him and gone out to watch. Mark Pope is currently checking him out alongside, like I mentioned, Chaz Lanier, Wooga Poplar. All of them are in Chicago, and Pope is reportedly still at the combine to watch Jaxson Robinson. I think his G League game actually just ended a little bit ago, and I think he finished with 10 points and two blocks, 10 points, 2 blocks, something like that. I need to go actually watch the tape because I hit record before it ended. But Robinson is somebody that Pope is still pursuing. We've heard some different rumors about how Kentucky is approaching this as to whether or not they are approaching Robinson heavily compared to maybe some other guys. Obviously, Almanor, if he ends up committing to Kentucky, and he is currently on a visit to UK, if he does end up committing to Kentucky, where does that put Jaxson Robinson? Do you play him at the 3? Do you move Kobe Brea up to the 4? Do you play Otega Owe off the bench? Do you play Owe off the bench at the 2 or the 3? How does that work? I'm not quite sure what Kentucky would do if they get Almanor, because at that point, I think Jaxson Robinson and whether or not he would be able to actually find a spot that he wants on this roster, that would be in question. I would hate to see that happen just because of how much upside I think Robinson has as a player, especially with his experience. I wouldn't be mad at Almanor taking that spot and kind of taking those minutes from what could be Jaxson Robinson. I'm not mad at Almanor committing. I think he's a good player, and I'd love to have him. It's just I would like to be able to see Robinson find a spot on this team at the end of the day, and obviously he's still going through the draft process, and according to various rumors out there, it's not going to take a ton for him to stay in the draft, so maybe that's what he ends up doing. Maybe that's why Kentucky's covering their bases by getting the FDU transfer in Almanor. But I still really do think Kentucky's got a chance with all 3 of these guys. I would be shocked if Almanor's not committed by the end of the week. That's just my thought on this. If he comes out of this visit, which ends on Thursday, by the way, if he comes out of this visit and he's not committed by next Sunday, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, maybe that means good things for Robinson. Maybe that means good things for Kentucky's chances. Who knows? Robinson might have already announced that he's pulling out of the combine and he's returning to college, and he picks Kentucky by that point. Not sure what's going to happen. I'm going to be very intrigued to kind of see how all of this plays out, because Kentucky, I think, is going to get 2 of these guys. I think they're going to get 2. If they don't, they'll probably go with Wooga Poplar. I'm not sure, or at least they'll try and pursue him. It's all going to be fun. The transfer portal's been extremely chaotic. We'll continue to follow it here on Locked On Kentucky. All right, we got one more player I want to talk about here. A player that is transferring out of BYU. Would he fit in terms of getting the role that he wants on this roster? No, I don't necessarily think so. But would he be an excellent addition to this roster? I do think so. Let's talk about Noah Waterman here in a second. Before I do that, I want to remind you guys, again, if you've not subscribed to the YouTube channel, would greatly appreciate it if you did so. If you're listening on podcast, follow along there as well. Locked On UK and Lance Dawe _ are where you can find me on Twitter. And I would highly encourage you guys to click the link in the description below. Go join the Locked On Kentucky Discord. It's just a place for all different fans of Big Blue Nation to chat not just about basketball, but football, baseball, volleyball, anything you want to talk about. We've got it going on there in the Locked On Kentucky Discord. I think there's over 200 of you in there right now. So appreciate everybody that's joined up. It's free. It's just a place to hang out and chat. Again, link is in the description if you want to go join up there. All right, wrapping up the Tuesday edition of Locked On Kentucky. So we've got a transfer portal player here out of BYU, a forward that was a very interesting piece for the Cougs just a season ago with Mark Pope. And that is Noah Waterman, 6'11", 220-pound senior, who is technically entering his 6th year of college. He redshirted his first year of college at Niagara, and he transferred to Detroit Mercy, played there for 2 seasons, and then he transferred to BYU, and he played there for his last 2 seasons of college. So technically, he's entering the portal to go into his 6th year of college. He played 8 games at Niagara, averaging 6.1 points as a freshman before, again, redshirting, which I can what I can assume is injury. And he has been a stretch 4/5 for the majority of his career. And that's what intrigues me about Waterman. Is you may say, okay, why are we talking about him potentially as a candidate for Kentucky? Well, Kentucky hasn't reached out. Who knows? He may commit to somebody else by the end of the day. We don't know. But Waterman, I think, could find a spot at that power forward position if Kentucky doesn't get Almanor. If they don't get Robinson, I think Waterman would be a very interesting piece. Take a look at his numbers from a season ago. 9.5 points per game while shooting 46% from the floor and 37% from 3 while shooting 4.7 threes per game at 6'11", 220 pounds. He also shot 80% from the charity stripe, almost 81%, 5.4 rebounds, 0.7 assists, and 0.6 blocks. This kid was a pure outside shooter. That's kind of what he did for the BYU Cougars outside of getting out in transition and scoring quite a bit. Here are some of the more in-depth numbers. He shot 66% at the rim, which was only 28% of his field goal attempts, which is a very low number for a 6'11 forward, but that means he was outside knocking down some shots. He shot 36% on left break threes, 41% on right break threes, and 44% on left corner threes. So he's a really solid outside shooter, and he likes to throw them up there, and he was really, really, really good for BYU in transition. He was in the 88th percentile of transition scores in college basketball just a season ago. And when you pair him up with guys like Kerr Kriisa, with guys like Lamont Butler, with people on this roster, with players on this roster who can pass the ball around, it really does give you some lethal opportunities in transition. We've talked about this with Mark Pope and his system, and just like how he plays offense, how he pushes the tempo, how he's got players that can space the floor. If Waterman is not outside the arc, he's somebody that can run in the middle of the floor, kind of rim run, and be somebody that can be on the receiving end of a very open entry pass to get a layup or a dunk in transition. It'll be very, very easy, I think, to find Waterman at times because of the three-point shooting capability that Kentucky's roster could have this upcoming season. And that's if Waterman even takes a look at Kentucky. Will he end up taking a look at Kentucky? I'm not sure. I just think that he would fit very, very well at the power forward spot alongside Andrew Carr, who can kind of do similar things to Noah Waterman. It's just I think Waterman was just a slightly better outside shooter. He had a 58% effective field goal percentage in catch-and-shoot situations. That is in the 83rd percentile of catch-and-shoot scores. He's another great spot-up scorer that I think Kentucky could add to this roster. Noah Waterman at 6'11" was primarily utilized as a power forward during his time with the Cougars, but also was utilized at center as well. I think that he would be great addition. He also took the 3rd most threes on this roster, and this was a team that really, really liked to shoot outside shots. Spencer Johnson, 145 threes. Jaxson Robinson, 229. Dallin Hall, 145. Trevin Knell, 174. Noah Waterman, 154 threes behind Trevin Knell and Jaxson Robinson. They could light up. This BYU team could really light it up from beyond the arc, and I think Waterman would be somebody that could fit in. Would he play a ton of minutes? I think that would be interesting to see how that dynamic would work with him and Carr, because Mark Pope has spoken so highly of Andrew Carr recently, saying that they're going to play him in a Lauri Markkanen type of role, which again, will just be fascinating to see how that ends up developing. I like Carr, but I think that if you pair him with somebody like Waterman, that would make it a very lethal 1-2 punch at power forward of multiple players that can go out there and knock down outside shots. I like it a lot. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you like Noah Waterman potentially as an addition to this team? What do you think about Lanier, Robinson, and Almanor? You can leave that in the YouTube comments below. All right, that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Kentucky. You can follow the show on Twitter at Locked On UK. You can follow me on Twitter at LanceDawe_, and you can follow the show over on Instagram. That is at Kentucky Podcast. Any questions, comments, concerns, leave those in the YouTube comments below. Hit me on the socials. I will see you all tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Kentucky. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and God bless.